welcome back to another Touchpoint Group Banking App Insight session, and we are looking at the UK banks for the month of April. 3 banks featured this month. We have Barclays, and they are starting to get into danger territory. Nationwide, who are continuing to lift, and one out of the box, Tony Patrick, TSB, who are finding themselves in a little bit of trouble, but I'll let you take over and go into the detail.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Yeah, so TSB we don't normally cover, but let's have a look at some normal numbers we look at when we jump into this. So the first thing we can look at is our scores for the major banks across the UK. So one of the things about this particular chart, as we always talk about, is that HSBC is sort of historically just about a year ago had problems, so it's ruining our scale. So I'll just chop that away for the moment. What I can do, it helps us see the picture of what's going on. So this score, as we talk about this all the time, but the question we get is, why is this score so important? This is our engaged customer score. So what this is those customers giving both a score and a comment. And what makes that so powerful is any movements we see here, we actually know exactly why that's happened, because there's a comment attached to everyone who's given that score. And this will be different to what you see in the normal scores, which are normally flat, which you see in the app stores. What we're seeing here, though, is the pointy end. This is where you need to be focusing rather than looking at everything at once. Now, one story here, as we brought up, is NatWest and how well they've done, and they've gone up against Lloyd's at the top there. They haven't necessarily overtaken them. Maybe 1 point they did slightly. They're still up there, slightly down, but they're doing very well there, which is great. Now, as Glenn mentioned, Barclays has dropped away. So we saw that last month, dropped away into March, but that hasn't immediately jumped back in April. So we need to look at that and see what's going on. Let's move forward, though, and see what's happening elsewhere. So lots and lots of banks sitting in here. One of the ones I want to have a look at, though, just briefly, is Monese. Now, traditionally, Monese is sitting around 2.75 to about 3, and it's jumped up now to above 3.5, and it's hitting the territory of other banks there. So we're not going to focus on it today, but something interesting for Monese to be aware of. Whatever they've done recently has actually worked, and hopefully they can maintain that. Now, one of the ones we want to look at as well is TSB. So we don't normally look at TSB from our normal mix, but here we can see its historical movements, had some trouble in August, but it's maintaining a level of just below 4. It has peaked above 4 in January, but then since then it has dropped away. So what's happened? What's happened between January and those other periods? Just to compare and contrast, let's see what we'll cover off today. So I don't want to cover off too much into Nationwide, but one of the things Nationwide is doing well is keeping itself above that 4 level. It dips just below sometimes, it is maintaining that. And in fact, in April, it's actually hit above 4. It's sitting there at 4.3. And that's probably one of the better, except for about a year ago, it was about the same. So it's hitting its sort of peak performance at this point, and hopefully they can maintain that across time. Now, let's have a look at TSB. So TSB we just saw has gone down in February, March, and April. What has happened? Let's have a look. Now, first of all, this is what we're looking at is that this is our first diagnostic. Getting these things right is making sure your app is going to function at a basic level. So what we're looking at here is what we call our SURF analysis, looking at security and authentication, usability, reliability, and functionality. Now here, these are pain points. Getting these as low as possible is our goal. And what I can see here between January and that period where TSB dropped is massive increases. So reliability more than doubled, issues more than doubled, functionality issues doubled, usability issues doubled, security authentication issues doubled. So across the board, there have been issues for TSB they need to get on top of. Now we can obviously go down to a bit of detail here, like authentication, for example. Let's jump in for TSB, maybe go down to some problem areas, the really, really bad ones, the 1s and 2s. And then from there, we can see what's going on. So we've got down a bit of detail, people having to uninstall and reinstall the app, can't log in using their fingerprint anymore, having to log in again and again. So constant login issues of just repeating, trying to log in for customers, which wasn't there previously. And that's just jumping up as a major problem. So that's an issue there for TSB. Let's have a quick look for TSB at some of the things underneath reliability. So broad technical issues have more than doubled, nearly tripled in terms of broad technical issues. app crashes have multiplied by 5. Even though it's low in the first place, you don't want those jumping up too high. At 2.3%, it's still controllable, but they need to watch out for those types of things like crashes and bugs and so on. So they need to pick up on those areas, and clearly that's having an issue on the score, as we saw. Let's have a look at what they've done across time. So this is TSB. This is looking at their score across time. One of the things we see is at the start of February, the 6th of Feb into the 13th, is where issues started to happen. And that hasn't really increased. We've got a bit of a pickup in the start of April, but we can see what's happened here. Getting into April, into those last 2 weeks of April, there's been a drop. The score's getting down to 3 again. So they haven't picked up to the levels they were pre-Feb. Let's see why. Let's have a look. One of the things I'd like to look at is the app release cycle. And what we're seeing here is that 7.0.1 was doing very well. That was when the score was doing really well in January. And then there was a release in February. And we see the use of 7.01 because customers obviously have upgraded, and that has dropped away in terms of usage. But what we're seeing here, this version 7.2.2 has jumped in, and suddenly the scores, if you see on the mouse over there, the scores are averaging around 3.2, so below 4, whereas before they were above 4, doing very well. So this release has caused an issue. And then TSB has then made another release at the start of March, this one here in green, and the scores there are around, you can see there, 3.3, 3.6, 3.8, and the frequency of use peaked at around the 3rd of April, and that's when we started to have this third release come through here in this cycle. So 7.4.1 in yellow here has started to pick up use. It's a dominant version use at the end of April. But what we saw though, that score has dropped at the end of April. So this particular one here, 7.4.1, hasn't solved the issues. So TSB needed to go back and have a look at what they were doing at 7.0.1 and get back to that level, because that's when their score was doing very well. So that's enough of TSB for the moment. Let's have a look at Barclays. Now, Barclays, if you recall, the past 2 months has dropped away in terms of its engaged customer score. And it was doing very well previously. So if we look at the bottom here, we can see the average score was 4.1 in February, then it drops to 3.4, and then comes up slightly at 3.6, but still that's well below what it was in February. One of the biggest things that's happening is across the board, we're getting things like reliability issues have jumped up. So if we see here in March, 1/3 of the feedback for Barclays was around reliability issues. These are all problems. We need to get these as low as possible. But imagine that, 1/3 of all the feedback was like reliability. Now, Barclays would be aware of this. They would know there's some reliability problems, but getting down to what needs to be fixed is where they need to get to. So functionality issues also picked up. They've improved slightly. So they're on the right path, but they need to continue that process. I have one last look, though, one last thing to look at is Barclays and how they've actually done in terms of their customer journeys. So these things here, things like depositing a check, monitoring account activity, paying bills, etc. These are by far the dominant things people are trying to do with their app. So getting these right is going to make you do very well. And in fact, those issues, though, that are happening across the board with reliability are impacting the feedback around these particular things as well. So things like paying bills, monitoring account, we can see they're sitting lower. We can see that basically a basic thing like checking your account balance is now scoring 2.8 compared to 3.8 previously. We can have a brief look at seeing what's happening in there, at looking at checking account balance and some examples. Let's get down to some negative things because this is across the board. Let's get down to those really negative things and see if we can see some major things going on for Barclays. So we can see here that some people they can't see their current account balance isn't revised, and so it takes 2 minutes to load and just see their balance. So there's delays in getting that balance being seen by people, and the app keeps crashing after they log in and when doing transfers with their balance. So basically this is a concern for customers. They can't even see their balance in some cases. So some issues there for Barclays they need to revise, and we'll see in May whether they can pick that back up and fix these issues. So thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And just another reminder there that when you have some core functionality issues across the app, it can impact so many of those user journeys. So it's really hard to get those lifts in performance when some of the fundamentals aren't working great. If anyone wants to have a chat, more than happy, reach out and we can organise a one-on-one with you. But in the meantime, get out there and we will see you next month.